In the particularly cold winter of 1794 and 95, there was a French army in the Netherlands fighting a coalition of British, Austrian, and Dutch forces. French army had reached Amsterdam for the winter under the command of General Jean-Charles Pichegru, but Pichegru found out that there was a Dutch fleet anchored not 50 miles away, just north of the Dutch port of Den Helder. That set of circumstances would result in one of the strangest events in military history. But the story was warped by the agendas and politics of the era. The capture of the Dutch fleet at Den Helder deserves to be remembered. On the 22nd of September, 1792, the French Republic was officially founded. Unfortunately, the struggle for the French revolutionaries had just begun. Even before the Republic was founded, the revolutionary-led Legislative Assembly had declared war on the Habsburg monarchy, including the Holy Roman Empire and the Austrian Empire, and invaded the Austrian Netherlands. Ultimately, France would end up at war with Great Britain, Spain, the Dutch Republic, Portugal, Sardinia, Naples, and Prussia over the next 5 years. Perhaps shockingly, instead of facing defeat, France ultimately turned away several invasions and went on the offensive, partly under the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte. Called the War of the First Coalition, European governments united against the French revolutionaries, especially after the execution of Bourbon French King Louis XVI on the 21st of January, 1793. At that point, the French faced quite a few problems. Their initial invasion of the Austrian Netherlands was a disaster, with a disorganized French army fleeing immediately upon sighting the enemy, and in one case even murdering their general. To make up for this, the French instituted a policy of mass conscription of men between the ages of 18 and 25, meant to rebuild the army. The mass conscription also gave them use of a greater manpower than their enemies, who frequently failed to work in concert. By November of 1792, the French had renewed their invasion of the Netherlands and defeated the Austrians at Jemappes on the 6th of November, and within a month occupied all of the Austrian Netherlands. They next put their sights on the Dutch Republic. Jean-Charles Pichegru took command of the French Army of the North in February of 1794. He had been taught at the military school at Brienne-le-Château alongside Napoleon, joined the artillery in 1783, even briefly serving in the American Revolution. He led 3 offensive campaigns that year against Great Britain, Austrian, and Dutch forces, eventually forcing them to abandon the Low Countries entirely. The Dutch had already been split by different political groups, including supporters of the current stadtholder, William V, Prince of Orange, and the Patriots who supported Pichegru's invasion. By the end of February 1795, the French had effectively captured the entire Dutch Republic. On the 20th of January, Pichegru had arrived in Amsterdam, where he planned to stay for the extraordinarily cold winter. Just days before he arrived, the city had revolted, starting the Batavian Revolution and forcing the Prince of Orange to flee to England aboard a fishing boat. The winter that year was notable across Europe. In Great Britain, one Englishman recorded that it had been the severest winter in these climates known in living memory. I think I may say more snow has fallen than in the last 7 years altogether. The city of Den Helder was under control of the newly minted Batavian Republic, which replaced the 7 provinces that had been united under the House of Orange, and were each led by a hereditary stadtholder. At least 14 Dutch warships, manned by some 5,000 sailors and marines, with 850 guns, representing most of what was left of the Dutch fleet, were Orangists and had hoped to join William in England, but had set out too late to become trapped in the tide race between Den Helder and the island of Texel. With them, a number of merchant ships were also trapped. The Dutch at Den Helder sent word that the Orangist ships were trapped, and the Dutch general, William de Winter, fighting for the French, led the 8th Hussars and members of the 15th Line Infantry the 80 kilometers to the port. They arrived in Den Helder on the 22nd of January. Local residents told the French captain in charge of the assault, Louis-Joseph Laure, that the shallow bay would likely support the weight of the cavalry. On the morning of the 23rd, Laure had his cavalry, each accompanied by a member of the 15th Infantry, spread out in several lines, with the goal of distributing their weight when they marched across the ice. To hide their approach, the horses had their hooves wrapped with cloth. While most of the cavalry took a position on the dunes overlooking the bay, Laure sent a smaller group of men to the lead ship, the large Admiral Pétain, commanded by Hermanus Reinches. A legend grew that the French had snuck aboard the night before and caught the crew sleeping, but logbooks and diaries from both sides proved that this is a myth. By the time that the Hussars charged across the ice, the Dutch Navy had already recognized the desperation of their position. Even if they were to defeat the oncoming cavalry, there was little hope that the fleet could escape when the French were in control of most of the country. Additionally, several of the ships were under repair, and the ships were frozen in a manner that would make battle difficult. That isn't to say that the French would have an easy time of it, since they would have needed to board the ships as if they were each their own miniature fortress. The Dutch fleet was in an even more awkward position, as Great Britain would have rather seen the fleet destroyed than fall into French hands. The unusual winter had kept the British fleet from accomplishing either capture or destruction. Captain Reintjes, who probably already received orders from the Dutch Council of State, which took control of the country following Orange's flight, which officially advised Dutch commanders to cooperate with the French and offer neither combat nor resistance. What exactly happened that chilly January is unclear. None of the persons involved wrote an account of the events, and books written about it, the first in 1819, relied on uncritical reading of earlier publications and rarely interviewed those who were present. It was that first publication, Antoine-Henri Jomini, that helped to submit the story of the heroic Battle of Texel Roads. As late as 1934, Archibald MacDonald wrote that the ragged men thundered on their horses across the ice to capture with naked swords the battle fleet of Holland. There was some kind of engagement, but whether that was anything like a battle, or if indeed anyone ever fired a shot, is not clear. However, it was accomplished. Lohr's men accepted the surrender of the Dutch fleet, which was later returned to the Batavian Republic. It is a remarkable event, possibly the only time in history that a navy surrendered to a unit of cavalry. The event was only possible because of a very unique set of circumstances: the shallow bay the fleet was trapped in, the abnormally cold winter that allowed it to freeze, and the timing that brought them all together at the same time. French sources in the years after the battle described it as an actual battle, acting as protagonists in which the cavalry surrounded and fought the Dutch until they were forced to surrender. The first Dutch account, only published in 1845, offered a different account. It claimed instead that the French surrounded the fleet, but that Reintjes surrendered without offering a defense. Johann Cornelius de Jong, who wrote that account, spoke to several Dutch officers present at the event. A surgeon on one of the boats reports looking from his porthole to see a hussar on the ice. More convincingly, after he published the account, Lohr wrote a letter in response to it, which remains the only first-hand account of the battle from a French officer. In his letter, Lohr related that he had wrapped the horses' feet to muffle their footsteps. They confirmed unequivocally that they had not fought, only accepted the Dutch's peaceful surrender. He said that the Dutch appeared to prepare for battle when they first saw the French approach, but because of the way that they were frozen, could not use their duck guns to much effect. Instead, when Lohr reached the Reintjes ship, the sailors received us with good grace on board. Reintjes would go on to serve with the Batavian Republic and become a vice-admiral in that fleet. Though he may have supported William of Orange, the Dutch were wary of the British, who had been an enemy and competitor for most of the last century. He also may have seen the wisdom in preserving his career, which may explain why he did not scuttle the fleet, though he would have had several days to do so before the arrival of the hussars. For the French, the telling of the battle is a brave charge across the ice upon trapped Dutch ships fighting for their lives, with both a dramatic and a patriotic vision. Like much of post-revolutionary France, it was important to reinforce the pride and power of the Republic, an effect of the Reign of Terror, which punished many who complained about the revolutionary government and encouraged jingoistic support of the government. Pichegru was chased out of the army in 1797 after he betrayed the revolutionaries in favor of a conspiracy to crown Louis XVIII King of France. Shortly after that, he was arrested and sent to French Guiana after planning a coup d'etat. He returned to France in 1803 to lead a royalist uprising against Napoleon, but was arrested and found strangled in prison, which the government reported as suicide. The Battle of Texel Roads, or more accurately, the surrender of the Dutch fleet at Den Helder, is interesting for numerous reasons. It does say that luck plays a role in history, and that peculiar circumstances can lead to peculiar historical events. But it also tells us that the telling of events can be warped to fit a particular agenda. Most likely, the French never fired a shot at the Dutch fleet, which surrendered for myriad reasons that had to do with the complexities of the loyalties and relationships between the states at the time. The initial French reports of a battle were little questioned. It took nearly 50 years before first-hand accounts contradicted them, and still often the story is told of a brave charge by the hussars across the ice. But in reality, it's really no less interesting to hear the story of how a naval fleet surrendered to men on horseback, even if they never shot at each other.